podcast. Hi, everybody. So I'm Grace Bubeck, and we're back for the second session of the Awakening as Love retreat. And this session is with Miranda Macpherson. Hi, Miranda.
Hi, Grace. Hi, everyone.
Hi, welcome. And thank you for joining us, Miranda.
It's a total pleasure.
Yeah, it's my pleasure too, and everybody else's. So I just want to introduce Miranda quickly. Miranda is an author and spiritual teacher, and she's also actually a very good musician. She sent me a CD of her chanting, recording of her chanting, which is very beautiful. So Miranda has been teaching for almost 20 years, first as an interfaith minister, and sorry, I'm just having to close down a window here. Sometimes I get a bit kind of disrupted by the technology.
Sure.
So just coming back to Miranda. So Miranda has been an interfaith minister and doing spiritual teaching as an interfaith minister for a long time. But she had a very strong awakening experience in Ramana Maharshi's cave in India, in Tiruvannamalai, about 8 years ago. And since then, her teaching has moved more to a non-dual perspective. So I won't say much more about Miranda than that, except just to say that I'm very happy to have you, because I heard your interview with Unconscious TV, and you used a beautiful. I want to share with people because I just felt it really touched something very deeply in my heart and felt very truthful. And the image is, if you imagine the ego being this block of ice, you can kind of chip away at it, or you can just put it into the sun to melt. And the sun, of course, being the warmth of the heart and the energy of the heart, the energy of love. So I just thought it was a totally neat image and a very powerful image, and so I just wanted to have you and on this retreat, and here you are. So
thank you, Grace. Thank you. Well, that might be a good place just to start. I
yes, go ahead.
All the time, actually, as an induction.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just so often we try to surrender, we try to get out of the way, and of course the one who's trying is the one in the way, and so it's a very subtle process, the process of surrender, which is really what all of the great spiritual teachings come down to in the end. Sweetheart, will you please get out of the way? You know, and so our ego hears this invitation to surrender and says, right, you know, and then tries to do it, which of course is impossible. And so I like the metaphor, I find it very helpful for myself, of just letting the sense of me-ness, whether that expresses as a controlling or a lack of trust or a particular habit that's clearly historically based, you know, coming from a sense of self that really does identify with being separate and therefore limited and afraid and deficient. All that we all know comes with being identified with our ego. You know, that is really a huge call for love. And love doesn't need to get an axe and hack away at itself. Love invites everything to just melt. And so when we allow the ice of our ego habits and patterns and tendencies to come into the present moment, into the embrace of totality, the presence of love is an active, dynamic force of grace. And it does the work for us. It activates the transformation. And so our part in all of this is to learn to melt, to allow a melting. So this is really what surrender is. And I love the words of the Sufi mystic Hafiz, where he poses this great question. He says, what's the difference between your experience of existence and that of a saint? And he says, the saint knows that the spiritual path is really a sublime chess game with the beloved, and that God has just made such a fantastic move that the saint is rolling over laughing, tripping over joy, saying, I surrender. Whereas, my dear, I'm afraid you still think you have 1,000 serious moves. And so, of course,
that is such a sublime poem.
Isn't that great?
I just love it. Do you want to repeat it just one more time?
Well, the question is, what's the difference between your experience of existence and that of a saint? The saint knows the spiritual path is really a sublime chess game with the beloved, and that God has just made such a fantastic move that the saint is rolling over laughing, tripping over joy, saying, I surrender. Whereas, my dear, I'm afraid you still think you have 1,000 serious moves. So recently I gave my ongoing students a repeating question, which was, tell me an ego strategy you still hope one day will work. Now, of course, it's a playful question, but it's really the question. Because the strategy that we still hope one day will work exposes where the surrender isn't happening, where we still think, if I just tweak this a little bit, if I just get the right relationship, if I just manipulate the appearance of my being or my life in a certain direction, then I will have the prize. Whether for us the prize is a sense of freedom, a sense of love, a sense of connection, a sense of peace within oneself, a sense of fulfillment. And of course, the hope keeps us rejecting the now, and the dance of hoping for something different, hoping that the strategy one day will work, and rejecting whatever is here, keeps us on a cycling like a hamster on a wheel, and keeps us cycling in suffering. And so it's very, very important that we see this, and that we see it through the eyes of love, through the eyes that understand that the one who's hoping and seeking and trying and controlling is very afraid. So when we really see that, the holding on to any strategy is coming from someone who's small and afraid, who feels like a child, who feels cut off from the supply, then there's a natural and obvious compassion and love and forgiveness that emerges for the one that's attached and holding on. And I think this is so important and has been so overlooked, and particularly overlooked in many of the non-dual approaches that, forgive me for saying this, have been dominated for so many years by a very macho approach to working with our own humanity. And I don't know whether it's because I'm in a female body or for some other reason, but it's always been very apparent to me, the need, the very, very real need for love and compassion for wherever we find ourselves, wherever we are in our capacity to let the surrender happen. Because let's not forget that while we know in our mind, in our higher mind, that surrender is the name of the game, is the way, actually letting go of any one habit of mind, any one way of knowing ourselves, feels a bit like being asked to fall out of an aeroplane without a parachute.
Mm.
It can feel terrifying. It can confront our whole sense of reality. It can totally destabilize our sense of security in self as we know it. And so it's not a small thing.
Yes.
It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of maturity. It takes a lot of trust. And it takes a lot of understanding how to work with this frightened part that wants to cling, as Alan Watts said, wants to cling to the rocks that are falling with you.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And so this is where I'm particularly interested in exploring and helping people is, you know, what comes up for us in the invitation to surrender, and how do we allow the felt experience of I absolutely do not know,
Mm-hmm.
which feels like a free fall.
Mm-hmm.
How can we allow that and still not pick up any strategy or defense, so that we actually realize when we can be absolutely here, absolutely undefended, compassionate, completely accepting of where we are, and allow the let go to happen, we can discover that while it might feel like a free fall, all that really happens is that we're falling out of a structure in our mind. And so what that means is there's no hard ground.
Mm-hmm.
There's no possibility of a crash landing. Only you can't know that conceptually. You only know that after the fact.
Yeah.
And so it's really delicious to me that your name is Grace, because the whole process of surrender is really a movement of grace. The fact that you and I are even speaking right now, that we've been able to meet like this, is grace.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the grace is the loving fullness, the beneficent loving fullness of the no-thingness, the absolute, the no-self, that provides what it is that we truly need
Mm-hmm.
to let it happen, to let grace act upon us
Mm-hmm.
and draw us into the depth of ourself, into the depth of God, into our true foundation, to let, as Ramana said, to really let the mind drop into the heart.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if this is a good place for some dialogue. What do you think?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. You know, it's interesting to bring those two together, surrender and grace. Because there always is an element of grace in surrender, isn't there? In the
Absolutely.
sense that there may be, you know, there may be a new strategy that arises that says, oh, I have to surrender, I have to let go, I have to, you know, I have to absolutely just let go of control altogether. And it's just another way of trying to control it, right?
Yes.
Because the mind understands that invitation to surrender as just another strategy.
Right. Exactly.
And so it's it really is true that that moment of surrender, it's always a grace, but not only, because when there is that willingness, that openness to just say, okay, that's
Yeah.
it. I stop trying
Yeah.
to control, I stop trying to do anything. I'm just here.
That's it. That right there. I like to think of grace as having different dimensions, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So Ramana said something very beautiful about grace, that where I think he was speaking of grace as the ground of our own heart.
Yeah.
Grace as I like to call it grace as the basement of our being, which is a really beautiful thing to explore, because so often the primordial fear of our ego is that there's something lurking down there in the basement of me that's flawed, defective, or deficient, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But when we really allow that deep melting, when we really let go, we discover that what's really at the basement of not only ourselves but of everything and everyone is so much beauty. Ramana said that grace isn't something that descends from on high. He says when the mind subsides into the heart, grace rushes forth as if a spring from within you. So beautiful. When the mind merges into the heart, grace rushes forth, the palpable presence of love, compassion, beauty, all kinds of qualities, essential qualities, not qualities that are learned, but qualities of our essence, rush forth as if nectars from within our own heart. And this is a very, very important thing. So I look at grace as the ground of our being. And also grace as the sense of blessings, so the blessings of grace. So sometimes when grace opens up, it really feels like we're in a shower of support, love, goodness, nourishment, and it can feel both personal and universal. You know, there's the blessings of all the trees. I mean, just consider how every plant receives our waste and pumps our oxygen. If that isn't grace, I don't know what is, you know. And it's here all the time for everything and for everyone. But there's also a very personal aspect to the grace, and we perhaps experience it through being drawn together with someone else in a beautiful love affair, or the grace of a child coming into our life, or the grace of the circumstances that we genuinely need to flourish and thrive, emerging of themselves, not through our effort. And it feels sometimes when our spiritual eye opens, you know, we might perceive it literally like a kind of a fine mist of forgiveness or liberation, you know, that moves and changes us. So there's that sense of the ground of grace, but also the blessings of grace. And then what you were just talking about is, I think, a very important aspect, which is the grace of the path. When we really look at things, it's, you know, the transformation, shift from ego to essence. You know, we can't make it happen. You know, it's not something that the ego can do. And so when we humbly submit, when we do our best, but at the same time we say, I'm not in charge, I don't know, and yet we don't close down, we don't leave the present, we stay open, then grace acts upon us as if it's a transforming agent that liberates us, deepens us, brings us into contact with something and someone more real. And yet this grace dances with our sincerity, with our willingness, with our trust, with the development of what in, you know, classical spiritual mystical work, you know, is, you know, the classical virtues: trust, willingness, commitment, devotion, dedication, truth-telling, patience, engaging our practices. And I think that's a very important thing, particularly within the non-dual community, because so often there's a dismissing of the importance and place of spiritual practice. And I think there's a confusion there. because it is a dance, and Ramana said this. He said that there is a state beyond both effort and effortlessness. He said, until that is realized, effort is required.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
I
and
didn't
the
know
Bhagavad Gita calls that the gentle effort.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in my own experience in working with people, the more we sincerely engage the virtues, the genuineness, the willingness, the humility, the love of the truth, the honesty, the undefendedness, and work with practices that help us to engage that, then the more grace opens us up. So we're not the doer of the transformation, and yet we dance with the nectar itself. And when that happens, our lives become more graceful, more fluid, more effortlessness, more easeful, more at peace. We abide with less stress and defense and struggle.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's what I mean when I say grace.
Yeah.
There's a lot to it.
I should just add that, in our short exchange before starting to broadcast, Miranda said to me, I was going to talk about surrender, but it came to me last night to really talk about grace. So I said, well, go for it. But, I think the topic of surrender is also still quite important.
Very much. Well, it's really that it's not separate.
Yes.
Right. So grace actually enables surrender and supports the surrender process, because remember, the ego can't do surrender.
Yes.
It can only allow it. And so it really dials us into what is the appropriate effort that isn't more ego, isn't more resistance and control and efforting. And what can we engage? What supports the grace coming forth, rushing forth as if a spring from within us, to liberate our consciousness and help us lead a real and true life.
So, Miranda, as you know, before we get into how that can play out, let me just put something to you that I know a lot of non-dual teachers would say, which is that if you're engaging in practices, say that are heart-based, but any kind of practice, even the practice of self-inquiry, asking, who am I? Or who's asking the question? It encourages an attachment to that sense of a doer, of somebody who's doing something to get there. And that's why it's not useful.
I disagree completely. I think that most people, and I work with people all over the world and have done for a long time, the real shift in our consciousness, it comes when it comes. But I really like what the Zen masters had to say, which is that enlightenment is a divine accident, but spiritual practice makes one more accident prone. And they also said that, practice is realization and realization is practice. And so I think it's really a matter of what's the motive for your practice.
Mm-hmm.
So if the motive is to get enlightened, then yes, I would agree with, the fact that practices can become an obstacle. But if the motive for practice is, I love reality, I love the truth, I want to be in that love and engage it,
Mm-hmm.
then that is a very, very different platform
Mm-hmm.
from which to sit in meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Whether when we sit in meditation, we're engaging a practice of concentration or whether we're just sitting. And I give people, some of my students, in the beginning, I give them practices of concentration because
Mm-hmm.
without that, it's just mind wandering. It's not dropping into just being whatsoever. It's just wandering around and banging around in your mind.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
it depends where people are. And I don't think you can give blanket rules. Different things are appropriate for individuals at certain stages of their practice.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, when we come to self-inquiry, and I work with a very holistic form of self-inquiry
Mm-hmm.
that includes opening into what I call the what, as well as the who.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you meet what's here, thoughts, feelings, emotions, sensations, subtle energy, subtle experience, if you meet content
Mm-hmm.
without defense, without agenda, only out of what's true,
Mm-hmm.
then you naturally bump into the who. You don't even have to ask the question, who am I? Because it naturally starts to arise.
Mm.
Because all content is arising out of the ground of the who, which can't be reified into any word or concept. And so I'm more interested in guiding people into the direct experience of that. And I feel that practice is very, very useful. But it's really all about, the motive for our
Mm.
practice. Because of course, we can sit and meditate. I did for many years.
Mm.
I was working with many different spiritual practices, particularly I was walking a mystical Christian path and working very
Mm-hmm.
deeply with the teachings of the Course in Miracles. And my practice was
Mm-hmm.
mostly prayer and meditation, at least 2 hours a day of meditation
Mm-hmm.
every day for 20 odd years.
Mm.
And a lot happened, it was wonderful. I feel that I doubt whether the opening that happened in Ramana's cave would have happened without all of that practice. And yet, if I look back, I can see that the motive for the practice, a lot of the motive was to somehow fix the seeming problem of me,
Yes.
right? And so
I'd say the same was true for me.
I think it
I
is for most,
haven't. I started off meditating because I thought there was something wrong with me,
right.
and I
And so
needed to
most of us
somehow.
engaged a path originally because there's
Mm.
some suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not wrong. I mean, suffering is a profound motivator, not
Yeah.
just for individuals, but for whole cultures. And
And
it
talking
can
about
turn us
grace, talking about grace, I mean, the grace can work that way through
very much.
suffering because it brings us to some kind of spiritual opening
Right.
eventually.
Exactly. So that's absolutely included in grace, in
Mm-hmm.
that it has a purpose. It turns us away from just chasing after more fulfillment in the external world
Mm-hmm.
to a deeper inquiry that begins, firstly, perhaps, as how do I fix myself?
Mm-hmm.
But that does lead to
Mm-hmm.
what's real. How
Yes.
do I live? You know? And so for me, that's a deeper understanding of non-duality that also
Mm-hmm.
includes the dual.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah.
nothing is separate.
Yes.
And so I have a very deep trust of of just the mystery, really, the mystery inherent that's alive, pulsing within everyone. And I have a saying that your soul knows the way. It really does. And so in my work with people, I'm sitting with them and I'm listening to their soul. What is it that their soul is up to here? What does it need? What support does it need? And I encourage people to listen to themselves, not to their, desires and opinion and I have to have this and I must do that. What is the pulse underneath it all?
Yes.
And so that's been named in different traditions as, the yearning of the heart. And that's very sacred. But so often we feel the heart's deep yearning, whether it's for love or for truth or for God or for reality or for some kind of fulfillment or cessation of suffering. And the problem is then we come up with a strategy to get that yearning fulfilled.
Yes.
But if we just open into the yearning itself and let it be contacted fully and do nothing, then the guidance comes, the grace comes, and shows the way. And the way might include practice.
Well, I share totally with you the sense that all this is divinely orchestrated, like for everybody. What unfolds, how the spiritual searching unfolds, is, that is part of grace. And so, just to give an example out of my own life, at some point I felt very drawn to chanting. And at this point I wasn't into non-dual teachings yet, but there was such a pull to do chanting. And I realized looking back that the chanting was a way of opening the heart, of course, more than it had been. And through the chanting, I sometimes reached very, very blissful, very open states, which of course didn't last. And of course, reaching those states made me keep going. That's perfect too, isn't it?
It's totally beautiful, yeah.
Yes, and so, I can see looking back that had its place in creating more opening. And also when I do meditation evenings, most of the time I do some chanting with people, and they find that very powerful, because it's like somehow the vastness of the heart communicates itself through the chanting.
Absolutely. Well, in a way, the soul is lyrical.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, coming back to Ramana, letting the mind drop into the heart, that's the surrender that needs to happen. When he says the mind, it's more the controlling, the sense of me that thinks it's the independent doer. And that's where the control and the efforting and the defending and the hardness, which is obviously historically based. Underneath that, there's almost like a little child just scrambling around trying to do it, but feeling that it can't, feeling guilty and ashamed about that, and just trying harder. And that has to relax or melt, And the chanting is so useful for that, and I use it a lot too. Whenever I'm teaching, we start absolutely everything with just some basic, just melting into presence, some mantra, and some silence. And before I give any teaching or satsang, that's how we begin. That's usually how we end as well. And it's so beautiful because it gives people a chance to just drop, just melt, whatever's going on, whatever they've been caught up in, whatever's been difficult, whatever is.
Yes.
The chanting just takes us into that soft place of receptivity that is not mind. It's not a doing. It's just a
Yes.
melting into the heart. And I've used it for that reason. But it's an interesting, I'll share this. After my awakening in the cave with Ramana, it was very interesting. My nature has always been so devotional, you know? And so it was very interesting when I realized, the opening was be nothing, do nothing, get nothing, become nothing, seek for nothing, relinquish nothing, be as you are, rest in God. And in that, everything went. Sense of me, God, self, universe, other. There was no mind, no self, no commentary, pure silence. And lasted for a very long time. And then landing back into more ordinary awareness, I heard now integrated. So, of course, first integration means disintegration of all of the structures of support for the previous sense of self. We went through this huge process that lasted several years of really having my familiar identity really taken apart.
Yes.
And I understood that that was important and necessary, so I could just go, okay, yes. And during that period, I was on a retreat in Holland with Isaac Shapiro, who you might know. Did a silent retreat with Isaac. It was just great. It was perfect place to be as so much change was happening. And I was running in the woods one day, and one of the things that had dropped away after the awakening was my devotional practices. I couldn't pray anymore because who's praying into what?
Yes.
I just couldn't. It was very awkward because that was so primary for so many years prior. It fell away, and then all of a sudden I'm running in the woods, and I start to chant spontaneously. I start to chant the Gayatri mantra, and then it moved into Sri Ram Jai Ram and Om Namah Shivaya and all these chants that I'd been singing for years since I was 22, and all of a sudden it was totally non-dual. It wasn't subject-object. It wasn't me, this separate Miranda, singing to Ram or Shiva or anything. It was just the heart singing remembrance to that which is itself. It was that singing to and for and in celebration of that. And it was an explosion of absolute bliss. Full-bodied bliss, and I got it. There is no conflict whatsoever with devotional practice and non-duality when we realize that, as the Sufis say, it is the beloved's own love that loves the beloved in me. And then it makes sense when you look at all the great non-dual masters. Ramana, most people don't know this, but he wrote so many prayers and hymns to Arunachala, who was his god. Siddhartha did puja, classical puja, 5 times a day. So it's very interesting when you really see that prayer, singing, mantra, it's a natural expression of the effulgent presence of the heart that is love. It just is love. It is joy. It is, bliss, actually. So chanting gives us a way to just let that, as Ramana called the spring from within you, sprout forth. But I think additionally, we know from the Tibetan tradition and, Kashmiri Shaivism that mantra as well, Sanskrit mantra, has a very profound effect on the subtle body. And so that helps too. It bypasses the ordinary doing, thinking mind and helps to refine our consciousness and bring us into a more subtle alignment, which is useful.
Yes, totally. And, the way that, I guess that difference appears to me is that when I used to do chanting, it was as a way of getting to those blissful states. So that's clearly, still kind of
That's
motivated
someone trying to get somewhere. Yeah.
by the mind, yes. And these days, it's more like just a joyful celebration. It's an expression of the heart.
Yeah.
And there's a beautiful dance, because that expression is like it's almost like it loves to love another.
Yeah.
It loves that sense of devotion to another.
Right.
But
And that's
it's
because
only a seeming. It's only it's like that's the play, isn't it? Because I mean, it sings to another. It sings, it is devotional. It loves whatever it loves, but at the same time, it's just love. It's
well, again, we just have to look a little deeper because the source of that other is one and the same as the source of oneself. And so that's why we don't need to be afraid of relationship either. Again, I think so many spiritual paths, again, I think because they've been given through the masculine lens that isn't really a specialist on, the horizontal, it's been very vertically focused. It's also the same, like really opening to love in the human realm. When we really love another, whether it's our child or our lover or an aging parent or a dear friend, where has this being come from? Where have we come from? What's causing us to love one another? It is the love itself. And so then it brings us into a sense of sacredness and majesty for everything, even the very ordinary things. Like right now, as we're speaking, I can hear my husband grinding his morning coffee in the kitchen, and my heart feels completely tickled. It's delicious. It's precious. The beauty, just the simple beauty to be had in the ordinariness of our life that is non-dual as well. But it is not separate. So it reminds us that the ordinary activities of life are absolutely an arising out of the unity, and that all of it is to be seen as part of the practice of awakening. And I think that's really hopeful. It gives us hope for our world. There's a line in A Course in Miracles that says, "Liberation cannot be difficult. Your brothers are everywhere." And it reminds us that when you meet another, remember it's a holy encounter. As you see them, you'll see yourself. As you think of them, you'll think of yourself. As you speak to them, you'll speak to yourself. Never forget this, for in them you will find yourself or lose yourself. And so again, that too brings us into the immediacy of the here and now. Here we are together, you and I, Grace, and whoever is watching and part of this. Here we are together, just meeting, just being. What's causing us to be here? What's causing us to want to connect in this way and share in the pulse of truth? What's wanting us to let the fixed casing around our soul melt? What's causing us to love these teachings and want to engage them?
Yes, absolutely. And as you're saying that, I mean, the love just is so palpable to me.
Yeah. How do you feel that right now?
Sorry, I'm also, my voice is also just, I'm just going to have to cough.
Fine.
Okay, let's hope that's better. there's just a sense of there being such a powerful movement. I mean, I'll just say it in my own words.
Yeah, please.
Right now. Such a powerful movement in this world, in this very, physical, human, animal world of being, for love to manifest more strongly. I mean, that's how I that's how it comes to me. That's how it shows up in my mind. That's the ways that it seems to present itself, and there's just there's such a sense of it's time, it's now.
Yeah.
So many are waking up to this.
Yes.
So many are in that opening to that force that has created it all, and it just blows me away. Every time I touch into this, there's just such beauty and such mystery, and at the same time also such healing in it. I always connect with the healing aspect of it too.
Yes, I think because when we actually allow that grace to come forth in our direct experience, it comes with what we need.
Yeah.
It's that loving. Reality is that loving.
Mm-hmm.
That it brings forth exactly what we need to, to deal with the challenges in our life, to grow, to allow the next level of liberation, to unfold the depth of ourselves. And as you were saying earlier in our time together, that also includes the challenges.
Yeah.
I really love the writings of the non-dual Christian author Richard Rohr. And he says something very beautiful that I wholeheartedly agree with. He says that we are grown spiritually most by two things: great suffering and great love. And that's true in my experience.
Yes.
We're grown in a very particular way by the times when we're pruned back by life. Whether the pruning happens through the loss of some love affair we hope would work out that's difficult, or some challenge with our bodies, or some financial hardship, or some setback in our career, or some attachment being taken away. And it's never easy when it happens. And yet it's part of the grace that, it's like we're being pruned back. Something that is no longer useful to our soul is going. And so the invitation spiritually is to open and allow that.
Yes.
That takes great spiritual maturity, to open and allow, when things aren't going the way we hoped. And yet we're grown in a very particular and important way in those times in our life. And we're also equally grown by the fullness of love, the warmth, the friendship and sangha and connection, and the beauty of nature, and the blessings when they come, the blessings of grace when they come. And it helps us to thrive and helps us to remember what's real, what's meaningful. It helps us to focus and live our lives in accordance with what's truly important, and to let go more easily, to allow the melting of what's not so important, allow for change.
Miranda, I was wondering, I'm wondering how you would respond to that. the way that I understand suffering and how that makes us grow is that part of the part of the suffering, kind of like you said, I would say it kind of deconstructs the structures that keep contracted and tight and
Right.
not able to fully open to what is.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And so, the love, when that happens, is just like, the heart just opens so naturally when it
Mm-hmm.
experiences love.
Yeah.
Whether that's, the love of a teacher or the love of another human being or a child or an animal or even the love of nature. I mean, why do people love nature so much? Because, it allows them to be more open in their hearts.
Right. Exactly. I agree
Um,
with you about the suffering in that, but I think there's also the sufferings that aren't necessarily coming from our structures. For example, sometimes we suffer with our bodies,
mhm.
and the aging process is not easy.
Yes.
And anyone who's been in intense physical pain knows that,
Mm.
there's the suffering that comes from our mind that's made up of resistance
Yes.
and, agitation and that can't settle, can't accept our
Yes.
situation. And yet then, when our body's sick or when, someone we love dearly has just died and we're going through grief, this is definitely suffering. And
Mhm.
it's suffering that is just part of life
Mhm.
that we
Mhm.
need to work with and open to and allow. And again, that's, I think, where spiritual practice and things that help us to mature spiritually really are our allies. Because if
Mhm.
we can accept those sufferings and just allow that too,
Mhm.
then love is present with the suffering.
Yes. So I think to distinguish between suffering and pain.
Yeah,
You know, when I
perhaps.
when I speak of suffering, what I mean is pain that's resisted.
Yes.
And, like when we speak of physical pain, for example, and physical, problems, there may be a lot of pain, but when it's not resisted,
Mm-hmm.
it,
Sure.
it is a lot less painful.
Yes.
And it's definitely not suffering, it's
Mm.
just pain.
Well,
It's just physical
I don't know.
sensation.
I think part of why I'm not just automatically agreeing is that I hear so many students using what you're saying, which is a truth, as a platitude.
Mhm.
And so having also been through a bit of a journey myself with
Mhm.
2 herniated discs and spinal stenosis,
Mhm.
it taught me quite something very important about this. And
Mhm.
actually about opening through and accepting the suffering, and working through what was the suffering coming from mind, and what was just the suffering of the body going through a
Mhm.
juncture. And
Mhm.
what did it mean to surrender into that place and allow all of it? And I learned something very important about, you know, opening into not just the distinction between pain and suffering, but just really opening into the suffering and not resisting it at all.
Mhm.
It's very difficult when you're really when you're really hurting that much,
Yes.
whatever
Yes.
the cause of the hurt. It's not
Mhm.
easy. So it's something
Yes. It
I'm doing.
is.
And I'm
It
very
is
grateful
very
for it.
difficult. Yeah. And I didn't mean it as a platitude
No, I
because
know you didn't.
because um, my own life, the suffering was more at a maybe more at an emotional level than a purely physical level. And um, basically, what happens when the pain, whatever it is, physical pain, emotional pain, whatever, what happens when it's really when all resistance is released, and that's not once and for all, that happens all the time, needs to happen all the time, because the resistance to it comes up all the time, right? So what happens when there is a period of such pain, it kind of tends to deconstruct that tendency to resist.
Yes. Well, I think that's how we're growing.
That's how it's helpful.
That's right. I think that's what Richard Rohr was meaning, is that's we're grown. My own experience is we're deepened. There's something about opening into and through, surrendering in and through, even suffering, whether it's emotional suffering of loss, or not getting what you want, or physical pain, or devastation of some shock or trauma that we just didn't expect. And sometimes just opening the newspaper can do that.
Yes,
absolutely. Really, just opening the newspaper and seeing, whole communities of people starving or massacred. It is suffering, and it needs to not be avoided. And if we can open our heart to all of that, then somehow there's a deepening of the heart. The heart is seasoned and made broader and wiser and more mature, and then out of that, some fresh grace can come, whether the grace produces a sense of responsiveness, or whether there's just more compassion for the human condition. I know for myself, with what I went through with my body, I have a whole other level of kindness and compassion. For someone walking the street with a cane is clearly, elderly. It's a totally different thing now, because I have deeper appreciation for what that means.
Yes.
And there's something to me that's incredibly humanizing about it. That very importantly doesn't let us bypass our humanity.
Yes.
And keeps us connected with the humility of being human. And there's something absolutely important about that, I think, for us at this time in the world, and especially in non-dual circles, where we just don't lose touch with our humanity. We really let these deep ancient teachings penetrate us right down to the marrow and show us how to really live.
Yeah. I love what you say about really embracing our humanity. My sense is that this is really truly something that the women teachers bring to the non-dual.
I hope so.
To non-dual teachings. You were talking about a feminine approach earlier. It's not something that resonates so much with me, but what I do see is that there is there's somehow more of an, there can be more of an acceptance of our humanity and the grace that expresses and how should I say, the grace that works through that humanity. Our humanity is not a problem, really.
Absolutely not. It's the gateway. Actually, it's the gateway. So when I'm working with people, I just keep it very real. I'm interested. I don't really care about, you telling me, reporting to me what you've realized. I'm interested in what's alive and real here, right in this moment. What's true right now. And wherever you are, that's the gateway. Whether right now your heart's broken and you're feeling devastated, or whether your body's hurting, or whether your heart's exploding with joy and devotion, whatever is true in here right now, if we open into that all the way, if we surrender into it and allow it completely, and that's really what love does. Love is unconditional allowing.
Yes.
and
Yes.
does not dismiss or jump over or bypass anything. And
Yes.
that means when we open into our direct experience exactly as is, whether it's suffering or bliss,
Mm-hmm.
and we allow it completely,
Mm-hmm.
then more of grace or God or true nature
Yes.
comes forth, and the natural awakening process of our soul takes flight.
Mm-hmm.
And our work then is just to notice it, to be interested, to dance with that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a doing, it's actually
Mm-hmm.
a recognizing,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a recognizing that isn't just awareness.
Yes.
It's feeling, it's sensing, it's
Yes.
meeting everything. And
Mm-hmm.
then absolutely everything that arises in our direct human experience becomes the portal into deeper dimensions. And there's no
Yes.
end to it. That's my experience. I keep discovering
Yes.
more every day.
Yes.
Brought to my knees
Yes.
a little more every
Mm-hmm.
day. Thank God.
Yes. The deepening is endless,
Yes.
as my teacher Gangaji often says.
Yeah. God bless Gangaji.
Yeah.
So
God
I'm
bless.
noticing that there's some people who've joined us. I wonder whether it's a good
Yes.
time to see
I
if there's
think it's time to maybe open the floor for people to ask questions. And what I would just say is, I see there's some people already on the Hangout, but I'd like to just look at the YouTube comments before
no.
I take people into the Hangout. Is that okay by you, Miranda?
Fine. Do you
Okay.
mind, Grace? I just need to go to the bathroom very, very quickly. Is that okay?
Sure. Okay. So
Fast.
I'll take a minute to look at the YouTube comments and I'll put them to you when you're back.
Lovely.
Okay. So I'm just going to go to the YouTube page and see whether there are any questions. Goodness. Yes, there's quite a few comments. Just looking at them to see whether there are questions. Okay, I see a question by Jan or Jan. And Sandra has a question too. Elena. Okay, so Miranda, I'm just going to read out some questions to you,
Okay.
and we'll let you answer them. Whoops, I lost the page again here. Okay, so Sandra says, Grace, please ask Miranda, how can we allow melting, surrendering ego to the fire of the heart? Thank you. How? Can Miranda guide us through the process?
Sure. So, firstly, we want to see what is it that's in the way. What is the mechanism? And so, we need to look at that. And the way we look at that is very simple, really. We can sense perhaps there's a posture of tension or gripping in the body. We might notice in the heart or the emotional body there's, what is it? Is it fear? Is it anxiety? Is it guilt? Is it insecurity? Is it anger? Is it, fear? And so everything we see brings us a little closer. We want to see, okay, if it's fear, what am I scared of? Not just jumping to who's scared, but meeting the content first. So content will always involve thoughts, feelings, and body sensations.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we don't judge what should or what shouldn't be here, and we're just interested to see what is here, and we be specific, thoughts, feelings, emotions, body sensations, and we be specific. We also notice a good question to ask ourselves when we're caught in some kind of contractive pattern is to ask the question, how old do I feel in this place? Because all of our patterns of closure are really some strategy that we learned as our ego was forming into a personality as children. So it's a coping mechanism. Every defense is a coping mechanism that's coming out of our survival instinct. And so if we appreciate that that isn't wrong, that felt necessary at a certain point in our development, then there's less resistance. So we want to open towards it, just to meet it. So we might notice, I feel frightened, I feel 4 years old, I don't feel like I've got any strength in me. It's as if I don't have a lower body. I feel a kind of a nothing from the solar plexus down, and I'm scared and my arm tense. And I feel like I'm 3, and maybe some memory comes up. And so we just allow that. We just stay in our body. And the way to stay in our body, if you're sitting on a chair, is just tap your heels or you wiggle your toes and feel your pelvis underneath you, recognizing that you can't fall, you're actually held. You're held in this moment by the ground, which is an arising of the infinite ground of being. You're held by the oxygen. You're held by the chair. There's nothing you need to do. Then once we contact the habit of closure and we see more about it, we feel the force of it in body, heart, and mind, the practice then is doing nothing. Nothing to change or fix or get or do. That's how the melting happens. Just being there, not doing a single thing. Now this is hard because our mind will scream, I have to do something. I have to somehow fix it. I have to somehow change it. If we can just not move to do anything about it, but not leave ourselves. And so sensing the body and really feeling the contact with the body on the floor, on the chair, and the breath really helps us just to be here, just to allow everything to be met, and to really trust that your soul, your true nature, is so profoundly intelligent. The grace brings forth what's needed. And sometimes the melting just happens of itself and we find, the structure just disappears, and sometimes it doesn't disappear and we learn a bit more about what that really is. We get more in contact. So wonderful. That's how grace is manifesting. And so if something is still persisting, it doesn't mean that you spiritually failed. It just means there's more to see. Right? And so we come to inquiry without agenda to get somewhere, with only the devotion to seeing what's true. Okay? So staying in your body, opening into the phenomena of the what, body, heart, and mind, just letting our awareness and our attention contact it, but without doing anything to try and fix, change, and control. That's the basic practice of be here, be still, be now, be undefended. What I call ego relaxation.
Beautiful.
I
Thank
hope
you,
that helps.
Miranda. Yes, I'm
There's
sure.
lots of things on my website, by the way, I encourage people. I'm very, very practical. It's probably because I grew up in Australia, so my orientation is pretty down to earth. And in my website, there's a section on this called the Sanctuary. It's actually a virtual sanctuary. And there's a lot of practices that I've recorded that people can go to and have a look at. Many of them are free, and anything that costs me a lot of money to make, I've had to put a small charge, but it's all very accessible. And there's a lot in there, meditation practices of dissolving, allowing the dissolving to happen. So I hope people can have a look at that and find some benefit from it.
Yes, wonderful. I mean, that's one of the ways that grace works too, is like there's all this that's available now.
Yeah, exactly.
And all the teachings are there, all the teachings.
Yeah. I had that idea soon after the awakening in the cave, and I was living in London at the time. I was on the tube early morning, underground, going into the main part of the city, and the whole carriage was completely full. People were standing. There wasn't a single person that wasn't on an iPod. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be totally amazing if everybody was listening to something that was really supportive of them to be present and open into the day in awareness? Wouldn't that be amazing? So I thought, okay, this is something I want to do. So I launched it recently. I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, wonderful. That's a great vision. Great vision. So Miranda, I want to ask you another question from the YouTube Hangout, YouTube comments, if that's okay.
Sure.
There's a question from Matilda. The heart is a muscular organ. How can we open our heart, feel with our heart? Is that answered by your earlier answer, would you say?
I think so. I'll just say a little more, but I'll keep it fairly brief.
Yes, please.
We can't open our heart, really. All we can do is allow ourselves to feel. See, the heart is an organ of feeling. And so as we allow ourselves to feel everything and not close down or reject or dismiss, then the heart naturally draws us into the deeper dimensions of itself. And so the surface level of the heart is feelings and emotions. And they're coming from, obviously, our relative human experience, often more of our ego, but they're the gateway in to the deeper heart. And the deeper heart doesn't belong to you or me. It is the heart of being, or the heart of boundless love, as I like to say. And so that heart is just endless. It's oceanic. It's, as Ramana said, the spring from within you. It's nectars of unconditional love, compassion, empathy, joy, beauty, humility, devotion. And so as we just allow ourselves to feel everything, but not attach to what we're feeling, then the heart deepens, and there's no limit to where things can go from there. I hope that helps, Matilda.
Wonderful. And I think I'd add also just, anything that the heart feels drawn to, whatever that is, a particular teacher, a particular person, a particular practice, that's the heart saying, do that, go there, because that's what allows me to open. Yeah. So that's like how the opening happens, just naturally.
Yeah. Well, you're speaking
in conjunction to what you said, Matilda.
Really.
Miranda, not instead of, but in conjunction, in addition to.
Yeah. Well, the heart really, the mystical Christian understanding is that of the wisdom of the heart. They call it the nous, N-O-U-S, and it's the knowing of the deep heart, that the deep heart contains intelligence. So it brings forth the guidance that draws us this way in that.
Yes. So Miranda, I'm aware that there's more questions on the YouTube comment thread. There's also people on the Hangout. Shall I bring somebody on the Hangout?
Yeah, let's interact.
Let's see who I can bring on there. How about Sheila? Hold on. So, show her on the, okay. So, Sheila, you're on. Hello, Sheila.
I didn't realise I was going to be on. Hi.
Oh,
There you
Sheila.
are.
Hi.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
Great to meet you. Where are you calling from?
I'm sitting in Spain.
Aha.
I don't have a question.
Do you have a question?
I don't at this point in time, thank you.
Okay. So, was there anything that you wanted to contribute?
Nothing apart from heartfelt thanks for this retreat. It's the first time I've met Miranda and the first time I've met you, Grace, and just really grateful to be able to take part and listen. You feel the connectedness.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Yes.
Great. Glad you're enjoying it, Sheila.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sheila. Thank you for joining us from Spain. Let's see. How about I bring on Sarila? Hello, Sarila. Hello, Sarila.
Hello, Sarila.
Oh dear, he's busy. Okay.
Why don't we go back to the YouTube stream?
Yes. I'll try one more person. I'll try Matthew. See whether he's actually there. Hello, Matthew.
Hello.
Hello, Matthew.
Hello, Matthew.
Hello.
Hi.
I've just literally hopped online the last 2 minutes. I've been listening, so I haven't heard much of what's been said.
Okay.
But I can ask a question.
Sure.
I guess it's about I've been practicing self-inquiry for a few years, and there's a tendency for it to get a little bit cognitive. You know, reflecting on the mind, and I guess it can get a bit philosophical. And how do you transition from that more cognitive inquiry or looking into pure being and surrender?
Yeah. Well, inquiry really is body, heart, and mind. And so what you were saying, Matthew, is very common. You know, most people who read, you know, classical Advaita, because mostly the way that it was, the discourses were focused on, you know, inquiring with the mind. But inquiring also with the heart and with the body makes it a lot more dimensional and takes the process deeper. So when you inquire with the heart, you go towards the felt experience, which sometimes in the beginning will feel like certain emotions or certain feelings, but if we open through the different feeling tone, then we get to the more subtle dimensions, and our heart opens to experience reality rather than just think about or conceptualize. With the body as well, when we sense into our direct experience and we notice how that is in the immediacy of our somatic experience, then inquiry really starts to take off. So it's not a mental exercise at all. We're meeting with our direct experience, what's arising. So before you came onto the call, I was talking about inquiry. Truly, we start meeting the what first. When you look at the awakening experience, even of Ramana Maharshi, you know, he was triggered into inquiry through something very ordinary, seeing a funeral pyre go by his front window when he's 16. And of course, if you look at the background of that, You know, his father had died a couple of years ago. So there's a natural process of, you know, some psychic emotional integration trying to go on in his subconscious, but he goes into his direct experience. He goes into, you know, his experience in body, heart, and mind, and that experience includes a human ordinary reaction of fear. So often people think they're practicing inquiry, and they're really actually disassociating. So my approach is going towards your direct experience in body, heart, and mind, and meeting it, seeing what's there, feeling what's there, sensing what's there, and letting the mind be curious about what's there, and not trying to fix or change it or get to some supposedly non-dual state. Just letting the truth reveal itself.
Mm. Mm.
I hope that makes sense to you.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think more recently I've been feeling contractions in the body, feeling, and it's gone less. It's been less cognitive. It's been less, but also when you feel into the contractions, you know you're going into something that's quite painful, just on physically and emotionally quite painful.
Sometimes.
It can be, and would your recommendation just be to spend time just being with that?
Yeah, just allowing that. You see, most of the contractions that we experience are coming from some fear, some memory that felt fearful or deficient or difficult. And so as we go towards that and we let those structures melt, we're going to contact the reason that originally created the need for the defense. And so the practice is really allowing all of that and letting it be. You know, not manipulating our experience by trying to change or fix it. And what helps us most is just sensing our body, sensing the breath, recognizing that, you know, we're actually
I think the video's stuck.
Yes, I was wondering whether it was just me. Miranda, your video has your sound has stopped. Can you hear us? Okay. There you are. Miranda, can you hear us? Hello, Miranda. Hello, Miranda. I think we might have lost her there. I'm just going to post an invitation for her again. Wow, that's okay. Hello, Miranda. Hello, Miranda, can you hear us? Hello, Miranda, can you hear us? Okay, so we'll just see. Hello, Miranda. Hello, Miranda. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay, how's that? Better?
Better. Wonderful. Okay.
Strange. I don't know
There you
what's going on.
are. Yes.
It says Miranda Macpherson has been removed from this video call.
Well, here you are.
Here I am. I'm wondering, is there anything else from the YouTube comments that we should respond to?
Well, we have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
Do you want to take a YouTube question or a Hangout person?
You choose, whatever. I don't mind.
Okay. I'll bring out somebody in the Hangout then. Jürgen. Hello, Jürgen. Hold on. It's not. There he is. Okay, Jürgen, you have to unmute your mic. There you are. You're on, Jürgen. Hello. Hello. Hi, Jürgen. We hear you. We can hear you. Go ahead. Jürgen, did you have a question?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was wondering, hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. So I have been, okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have been a student of the Course in Miracles, and I really love Muji as well. Yeah. I was just wondering how to respond to, oh, good. Okay, my question is about the distractions that.
Jürgen, I'm going to turn your camera off because your upload isn't good enough, okay? But so that we can hear you. Okay, Jürgen, go ahead.
Okay, so
Jürgen, I'm sorry. We're going to have to let you go because we can't hear you properly. So sorry. Okay, folks. For some reason, Miranda has disappeared again too. So I think we're just going to close this session. I'm going to have a look at whether there are any more YouTube questions that I can feel I answer. Gardens in Desert has a question. Will you talk about having your identity be taken apart and the responses when this is occurring? You know, when it's occurring, there's two possibilities. One is that it's a very natural process and things just keep falling away. And they can keep falling away through outer events that, you know, like the loss of a relationship, the loss of a job, illness. You know, there can be a process of just things that used to be part of you just falling away. And that is quite, you know, that happens quite naturally. And sometimes things are quite radical, and there's a very radical shift, and people can have very strong awakening experiences where they become a bit dysfunctional for a while. So that's a possibility too. It's so individual, and you know, what Miranda said about grace is really true. We can trust that process. Whatever it is, that's how it happens, and that's how it needs to happen. So it's a very individual thing. We're all so different, and you know, our lives are so different, so it will show up in different ways in different lives. But you can trust the way it shows up in yours. That's what I would say to everybody. And so I know that there's more people on the Hangout, there's more people who've asked questions on the comment thread, but I'm going to have to close the session because I need to get ready for the next one. So I will say goodbye for now, and I'll see you again in the next session. And I will ask you, please do not join the Hangout unless you have an actual question, and only after the conversation with the teacher has ended. So in the next session, I'll be speaking to Muji, and I'd be very grateful if you don't pop in during my conversation with him, that you wait until I indicate that it's now time for people to join the Hangout. Okay? So thank you very much for your understanding. It's all explained on the web page about joining the Google Hangout. And I'll see you in the next session with Muji. Until then, bye-bye.